America's top diplomat is back in the Gulf trying to heal the rift between its Arab allies. Rex Tillerson's playing down the chances of an early end to the crisis. What will it take to find a solution? And does the Saudi-led quartet even want to talk? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the programme. I'm Jane Dutton. It is a case of try and try again for America's top diplomat, the US Secretary of State's back in the Gulf, reviving mediation efforts to end the 4-month-long Gulf crisis. Rex Tillerson's visiting Saudi Arabia and Qatar as part of a regional tour. His last visit was in July for talks described as intense but no deal. So what chance of success now? Tillerson's playing down the chances of a quick solution in his latest shuttle diplomacy. He's already blamed the Saudi-led group of countries for the lack of progress. Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, the United Arab Emirates and Egypt cut ties with Qatar in June and imposed a land, sea and air travel blockade. The Saudi-led bloc accused Qatar of supporting terrorism, allegations strongly denied here in Qatar.
As the Gulf dispute does near its 5-month mark, the United States remains concerned, as concerned today as we were at the outset. The dispute has had negative consequences economically and militarily for those involved, and certainly the United States has felt the effects of that as well. We think it's very important for the GCC to continue to pursue unity. It is most effective when it is unified, and none of us can afford to let this dispute linger. So we again call on all the parties involved to continue to work towards discussion and dialogue and finding a way to deal with the differences. We ask that everyone minimize the rhetoric and de-escalate the tensions and take steps to do so. It's not a healthy environment that we find the current situation. The U.S. is going to continue to do our part. We're going to continue to support the Emir of Kuwait and his efforts towards finding a diplomatic solution, and we will continue to engage all parties as how we can better help them understand the concerns and possibly find a solution.
Let's now get the thoughts of our guests joining us here in Doha. Fahad bin Mohammed Al Attiyah, Qatar ambassador to Russia. In London, Andreas Crick, he's an assistant professor at the Defence Studies Department, King's College of London, and in Washington, D.C. Via Skype, Khalil Jashan, the executive director of the Arab Center of Washington. Very good to have all three of you with us. A very warm welcome. So the press conference between Rex Tillerson and the Qatari Foreign Minister, I'm just going to précis this very briefly. The Qatari Foreign Minister, Sheikh Mohammed bin Abdul Rahman Al Thani, said they support the US mediation effort here. It's up to the other countries to also push for dialogue. Tillerson also encouraging dialogue, but says that Washington won't impose any solution. Fahad bin Mohammed Al Attiyah, I mean, really? Is that it?
The US government is respecting the integrity and sovereignty of nations when they take steps and measures. In this instance, it's trying to give them a chance to address this in a civilized manner. Obviously, all efforts have come to a dead end. Clearly, he has mentioned in his press conference that he has spoken to the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, tried to find whether he is even prepared to engage in a dialogue, let alone to travel and meet somewhere to get into discussion. And the response was obviously negative. So I think the US can and indeed has the power to place more leverage. At this point, we're trying, from what it seems, they're trying to explore avenues so they don't have to escalate from their end. And I think this visit, we will see probably, I mean, that's my take on the matter, is that things will probably change as we go forward.
Khalil Jashan, I wonder what you make of the meetings so far. I mean, we've seen the turnstiles been spinning here in Doha with politicians coming through, Tillerson being the latest, all with the same conclusion, pushing for more dialogue. Did you expect more than that?
I didn't, frankly. I think the Secretary of State was quite clear before he left Washington on Friday that his expectations were somewhat dampened or limited. He expected to express again his concern and of the administration to U.S. allies in the region who are parties to this conflict, and to continue the effort. I think he reiterated today very clearly that the U.S. remains very concerned about the price that has been paid by everybody, including the United States, as a result of this crisis. And he doesn't think this crisis should continue, and neither would his efforts and those of the administration to explain this price to all the parties concerned. And hopefully, that 50% chance, in the sense that we have one half of this conflict, the one side, Qatar, is fully cooperating with the Secretary and is moving forward with whatever it has been asked to do, while the other side remaining on the sideline and is not engaging. So that 50% chance is what the Secretary needs to continue to focus on.
And what do you think of this, other than Qatar being keen to talk, Andreas Krieg, and the diplomatic paralysis that we're seeing? A Secretary of State doesn't often get on a plane unless they have deliverables. He did say that he didn't have any deliverables. He was probably protecting himself, and he was wise to do that because, as we've seen, nothing's come out of this. But, surely he must have got onto a plane knowing that there possibly was a chance of some sort of breakthrough. What is it? Where is it?
Now, that's the $1 million question of where is this breakthrough. But let's not forget, this is not a Gulf travel that he done. This is not a journey to the Gulf, it's a journey to Asia. Even the talks he had today and yesterday in Saudi Arabia were mostly looking at Iraq. They weren't really looking and focusing too much on the crisis, on the Gulf crisis. So I think his expectations were relatively low. The Trump administration is quite desperate to find a way out of this. But at this point, I think, they realize that Saudi and the UAE in particular have climbed quite a tall tree. And it's quite difficult for these countries to come down from this tree without losing face, considering that the international community has been quite on the Qatar side, because they've realized that Qatar has made a lot of concessions. Qatar has been willing to talk. Qatar has even made concession when it comes to dealing with extremism and the financing of terror together with the United States. So Qatar has made whatever was asked of it, while the other side hasn't really done and hasn't provided anything yet. And I think this is where the kind of the stalemate lies, because Tillerson kind of needs to push now the other side to do more. But how can he do this? I think he's moved from sweet talking to more coercion. There are two very important aspects. One of them is that he's been talking to the press quite freely, talking towards Saudi Arabia and the UAE directly, saying you need to do more. Qatar has done its part. And on the other hand, Mattis, the defense secretary, has now withdrawn any efforts to basically hold joint GCC military exercises, but at the same time holding a military exercise with the Qatari armed forces this week or last week. So, this is there's a lot of messaging going on at the moment with a lot of pressure. But to be honest, as long as they say, and he said this again now in this press conference, the Kuwaiti Emir will take the lead on any mediation effort. As long as this is the case, I don't think they will be able to get out of this quagmire that they're in. And they need to find this a ladder to allow the Saudi and the UAE in particular to climb down the tree and sell this as a victory, face-saving methods. At the moment, I don't think this face-saving measure has been found.
All right, let's quickly talk about the US and why it's here and playing an important role in trying to end the Gulf crisis. US Secretary of State Rex Tillerson visited the region in July, but left without a breakthrough, although a memorandum of understanding of combating and financing terrorism was signed with Qatar. Tillerson later appointed 2 diplomats to step up efforts to find a solution, and US President Donald Trump offered to mediate following a White House meeting with the Emir of Kuwait. In the wake of that visit, the Emir of Qatar and Saudi Arabia's Crown Prince had their first phone conversation since the crisis began in June. Hopes were dashed within a few hours, and the deadlock has continued since. That didn't bode well, or doesn't bode well, Fahad, does it, for future conversations if they can't even have that type of telephone conversation? Was considered embarrassing and wondered why it had ended like that. What if the US now, in their arsenal of offers, the leverage that they have, offered talks at the White House, Camp David. Would that work?
Well, there has been countless efforts from the beginning in order to bring the parties just to a table of discussion, and as Rex Tillerson have mentioned before coming here, all the quartet are being hard-headed, refusing even to entertain this idea. So I don't think, I don't know how is it going to be viable to bring 4 countries that are unwilling to even engage in a discussion with Qatar over issues that the rest of the world seem to have not recognized. If there was a recognition for these issues, then the United States will be the first country to come to Qatar and tell it to abide by the rules of countering terrorism. And this is not the case. In fact, the US came and signed with us a counter-terrorism agreement, and many delegations from Europe have come to Qatar, and many more engagements have happened since then. So I don't really see, other than these baseless accusations as a reason for them to stop advancing any sort of dialogue with Qatar. And it goes to the very original issue, which is the worldview that they hold for the entire Middle East, which is one that revives authoritarianism, revives the very environment that created terrorism. So, in fact, I find the quartet are the very 4 countries that will reproduce even a greater and more violent terrorism in the future, given that they're trying to revive the very system that produced it in the first place. And Qatar takes a different position to them, and that's why Qatar is fought. We have to talk about the root cause of the issue and not fall into the trap of discussing the pretext of it.
Okay. Is that, Andreas, one of the reasons that they will not sit at the table with Qatar? Are they unwilling or incapable of reconciliation? Would it be deemed embarrassing to sit opposite the man they try to throw out of office?
I think that plays a very, very big role. If we look at the UN General Assembly that was held a month ago in New York, it was clear that the Qatar's emir would attend. Initially, Mohammed bin Salman, the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, was supposed to attend as well. But knowing that the emir was coming and the Qatari delegation was quite extensive, Mohammed bin Salman cancelled. He feared that he might be put in the same room, forced to sit with the Qatari emir by Donald Trump. And he didn't arrive, and he didn't come. And the same was true for the UAE, and the same was true for other players. Bahrain, for example, they only sent their deputy or their foreign ministers. And I think this is kind of shows that they didn't want to be put under pressure in the same room with the Qataris, face them and talk about this. Because, yes, what we've seen over the last couple of weeks, and Tillerson addressed this as well, he said, let's de-escalate. That means also de-escalate in the media. There's been a lot of negative narratives coming out about Qatar. The UAE and Saudi Arabia in particular have kind of steering the rumors about regime change. They have presented a couple of very abstruse individuals that they claim would be legitimate rulers of Qatar. This is something which is kind of nasty. It's gone down quite an emotional, quite a nasty route, whereby they have presented alternative emirs to the current ruling emir, and how can you, after this, this regime change policy, how can you face them now in the same room? Particularly considering that the Qatari people are very strongly behind Sheikh Tamim. So it is everything they've done so far has been very embarrassing, been decided by or been shaped by strategic miscalculation. How do they want to now sit down with Qatar and talk with them when everything until now has been about embarrassment?
Khalil, what prompted Tillerson to criticize the Saudi-led bloc so vehemently before he even got onto the plane? And what do you think he's trying to achieve by doing that? Could it backfire? He wasn't welcomed by the foreign minister when he arrived in Saudi Arabia, for example.
I think what prompted the secretary to make his statement is personal and institutional frustration with regards to the State Department and the administration at large for the lack of response. There has been, by the way, a steady flow of both pressure and diplomatic exchanges between the quartet and Washington. And the last one was 10 days before he left, and the quartet did not even dignify the Secretary of State with an answer with regards to the last meeting held with the ambassador of that country here in Washington. So it was just sheer frustration. And we all know, look, Tillerson is not a shy person, okay? He proved that, even internally in Washington over the past 10 days. And he calls a spade when he needs to do that. And so his statement was made in that context. It was not well received, definitely. It was meant to be a form of pressure, and that definitely was the case. I think it was irrelevant as to who received him at the airport or not. I mean, these diplomatic games are irrelevant to somebody who's not necessarily a career diplomat. He still had his meeting with the foreign minister.
Let's keep up with this pressure, and I want to throw this to you. Excuse me, jumping into to you, Andres. I'm hearing of this as a possible last resort, a congressional resolution where you get the House and Senate passing a war resolution where the U.S. military has 30 days to stop helping the war process in Yemen, the Saudi-led bloc there. 30 days to stop refueling planes, stop intel in Yemen. Will they pull that card? That's pretty effective.
It might be effective, it might not be effective. They're definitely not at that stage yet. I think Mattis and the Trump administration at large have been very supportive of the war in Yemen from the very onset, as soon as they joined the White House. I don't think they want to play that card at this point yet. We also shouldn't forget one thing, and I know that the media has been talking about this. I think that this is a mutually beneficial relationship, the relationship between the Gulf countries and the United States. Both sides are dependent on each other. It's not like back in the day, 20, 30 years ago, where the United States, had a lot of leverage. They still have a lot of leverage, but they're not just the sole protector anymore. The Gulf countries have other alternatives. They can turn towards China. They can turn towards Russia. They can turn towards Asia. Still, the United States remains the most important player, but the Americans need the Gulf countries as well. The entire U.S. foreign policy in the Middle East is now based on using the Gulf countries and the GCC at large as a proxy to fight the wars against Iran and to fight the wars against extremism and ISIS in particular. So the U.S. can't just withdraw and say, you know what, we're gonna cut all our funding, because they will hurt themselves, because the Americans are not willing to return to the Middle East in the same way they did in 2003 during the Iraq War. They need the Gulf to basically step up their game, take over responsibility, and deal with these local issues: Syria, Iraq, Yemen, Egypt, Libya, and so on and so forth. So they can't just pull this card or play this card now and then say, well, yeah, we don't support you in Yemen, but we still want you to help us in Libya and we want you to help us in Iraq. Especially considering the agreement they've come to over Iraq today with Abadi, I do not think that this is a viable option. The United States don't want to escalate it to that point.
All right, well, that clears up that point. Fahad, what about Qatar's leverage here? I mean, would they be having increased dialogue with Russia, for example, with your lovely, tantalizing ports here? I mean, where's your relationship with Iran? I mean, how frightening is that from a Saudi Arabian perspective?
As Qatar has always been, it is open to developing further and strengthening relationships with other countries, both regional and afar. And Russia is, first of all, is a strategic player in the region. It's a partner with Qatar on a number of very important projects. The chief amongst them is the agreement that has been reached in 2016, where oil prices have been stabilized thanks to the mutual efforts between the two countries, and there is more collaboration on stabilizing the situation in Syria and, of course, in the region at large. And so Russia plays that very significant, important role for maintaining stability and peace in the region. Qatar sees that positive role and tries to engage with it constructively. I think also Rex Tillerson mentioned that the situation that the quartet have created has led Qatar to be dependent on the airspace of Iran and of our neighbor. Let's not forget that Iran We share with Iran a major important gas field in the north, and we have long said that we are open to engage in solving our differences with dialogue. And as recently our foreign minister mentioned, that even despite the fact that we have fundamental differences with some of the policies that emanate from Tehran, nonetheless, we call upon all of the GCC and Iran to come around the table of dialogue to discuss our differences and to find solutions. So,
okay, all right. So sorry, Fahad, I'm going to put this to Khalil. So it seems certainly from Saudi Arabia and UAE's point of view, it's backfired. I mean, it's interesting that the UAE is not on Tillerson's list here. So what's he hoping for now? I mean, what's he going to do with the people that he's leaving out and the holes that can be filled going forward? And sorry, and let's bring in the GCC there, because we've got a meeting to look forward to. Is that going to happen?
The meeting is not going to happen. I think the meeting, all indications today, as we speak, point to the fact that it's going to be postponed indefinitely. That's what at least the sentiment of the Kuwaitis are at this time. And in terms of excluding any parties from this visit or any other visits, I mean, contacts are continuing with all the parties, frankly. Some are excluded from this visit, mostly because I think the administration feels that this particular party that you referred to, the Emirates, has not been as cooperative at all in this effort. So they feel like it's a waste of time anyway to include them in this itinerary. But they feel that as long as a decision is made by the larger and more influential party, the leader of the quartet, that is Saudi Arabia, then the rest would follow. At least that's the impression here in Washington. And they feel that if anyone is to basically flinch or change its position, it will be most likely Saudi Arabia rather than the Emirates. I mean, this is the reason for this particular stop there. In addition, I think as one mentioned earlier in the program, this is an agenda that's not totally focused on the GCC crisis. There are other items on the agenda that had nothing to do with that, and this trip has a diverse and complex agenda. So that stop was not necessarily viewed as crucial to this particular trip.
Okay, Andreas, what's it going to take? Reluctance to talk, certainly from the Saudi Arabian side, so we might not see anything in Camp David soon. Political impasse. What needs to happen right now?
I'm very pessimistic because I think all sides have made it clear that they are now, their plans and their strategy ahead is one which is not within a GCC of 6. The UAE and Saudi Arabia will probably go forward having meetings, joint meetings within the quartet, possibly leaving out Kuwait and Oman as well, because these two countries don't really want to be part of a GCC of 5 without Qatar, or with Qatar being on the outside. Qatar itself said, we are going forward with a strategy of being an island. We're no longer looking at it as a peninsula. We're an island. We're having our policy has to be one of an island. That again also suggests that Qatar is saying if nobody wants to talk to us, we will not give up our sovereignty and surrender to the bullying of Saudi Arabia and the UAE and move forward independently of Abu Dhabi and Riyadh. So it's very hard to say. I think it is hurting, but it's not as painful as some people make it out to be. There are losses on all sides, but all sides can live with it for the time being. So I'm very pessimistic that in the coming month there's going to be any breakthrough diplomatically.
Right. It seems clear it's not going to end anytime soon. Gentlemen, very good to have you on the show. Big thanks to Fahad Al-Attiyah, Andres Crick and Khalil Jashan. And thank you, too, for watching. You can see the programme again anytime by visiting our website, aljazeera.com. For further discussion, go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on Twitter. Our handle is @AJ Inside Story. Mine is @Jane Dutton. Thanks for watching. Goodbye for now.